The galaxy had grown quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of a summer evening, or the contemplative silence of a monastery at dawn. This was the silence of subjugation, heavy, oppressive, and absolute. It pressed down upon 10,000 worlds like a lead blanket, suffocating hope beneath the weight of inevitability. From the crystalline spires of Next Prime to the floating cities of Arios 7, beings across the galaxy moved through their daily routines with the mechanical precision of the defeated. They worked, they bred, they died, and above them all, watching with eyes that burned like distant stars, ruled the Sci-Fi. The Sci-Fi had not conquered the galaxy through superior technology or overwhelming numbers. They had done something far more terrifying. They had conquered it through will alone. Each Sci-Fi possessed what their ancient texts called the Kethathon, the mind fire. With a single thought they could crush starship hulls like paper. With a glance they could turn a planet's atmosphere into a weapon against its own inhabitants. They were living gods walking among mortals, and they had ruled for 3,000 years without challenge. Until humanity arrived. Captain David Kane stood on the observation deck of the Defiance, his weathered hands pressed against the reinforced viewport as he stared out at the dying world below. Earth hung in space like a bruised fruit, its once blue oceans now a sickly green, its continents scarred by impact craters that glowed with residual energy. 67 million, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of life support systems. Behind him, Dr. Lydia Cross looked up from her tablet, her silver hair catching the dim emergency lighting. I'm sorry? 67 million humans died in the first wave. Kane's reflection in the viewport looked older than his 53 years. Lines of grief etched deep around his gray eyes. They didn't even give us a chance to surrender. The attack had come without warning, without declaration, without explanation. One moment, Earth's orbital defense platforms were humming with normal activity. The next, they were twisted metal sculptures, crushed by invisible hands that reached across the void. The Sci-Fi fleet had materialized in Earth's system like a nightmare made manifest. Sleek, organic vessels that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns and radiated an aura of barely contained power. The demands that followed were simple. Submit or die. Humanity's response had been characteristically human. Sir, came a voice from the bridge communications array. We're receiving a transmission from the surface. It's Admiral Rodriguez. Kane straightened, his reflection shifting in the viewport. On screen, the holographic display flickered to life, revealing the haggard face of Admiral Maria Rodriguez. Behind her, the command bunker's concrete walls were cracked and stained with what looked suspiciously like blood. Sparks fell like snow from damaged electrical systems. David, she said, her voice tight with exhaustion. We've lost Buenos Aires. The Sci-Fi commander calls himself Vorthak. He turned the entire city's infrastructure against itself. Water pipes became weapons. Steel beams twisted into nooses. Even the concrete turned to quicksand. Kane's jaw tightened. Casualties, 3.7 million. In under an hour. Rodriguez's eyes were hollow, haunted. He's demanding we hand over all resistance leaders by sunset. If we don't, she didn't need to finish. They had all seen what happened to the colonies that refused Sci-Fi demands. Entire continents reduced to glass. Atmospheres transformed into poison. Populations that simply stopped existing. Ma'am, Kane said carefully. With respect, the Sci-Fi don't understand what they're dealing with. Rodriguez's laugh was bitter. Don't they? They've crushed every civilization they've encountered. They have powers that make our best weapons look like stone knives. What exactly don't they understand? Kane turned from the viewport, his eyes meeting those of his bridge crew. There was something in their expressions, something the Sci-Fi would never comprehend, no matter how powerful their mindfire might be. It wasn't hope exactly. It was something deeper, something harder. It was defiance. They don't understand that we're from a death world, Kane said quietly. They don't understand that everything on Earth, everything has spent 4 billion years trying to kill us. They don't understand that we've been fighting since before we could walk upright, that we've turned survival into an art form. Dr. Cross stepped forward, her scientific mind already racing. Captain, I've been analyzing the Sci-Fi energy signatures. Their abilities are psychic in nature. They manipulate matter through focused mental energy. But there's something else. Something they're not telling us. What do you mean? The power levels are incredible. Yes, but they're also limited. Each use of their abilities creates a neural strain pattern I've seen before. Her eyes lit up with the fervor of discovery. In humans with severe depression, the energy expenditure required for their mind fire is literally burning out their brain chemistry. Kane felt a spark of something dangerous. Not hope, but possibility. How long? Based on the energy signatures from the Buenos Aires attack. If Vorfak keeps using his abilities at that level, he'll suffer complete psychological breakdown within 48 hours. The bridge fell silent except for the steady pulse of the ship's engines. Kane could feel the weight of 10,000 years of human stubbornness settling on his shoulders like armor. "Dr. Cross," he said slowly, "how many Zephyri are in that fleet?" 12 ships, maybe 40 individuals with significant psychic abilities. "And how many humans are left on Earth?" 7.2 billion, give or take. Kane smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Then they're outnumbered. 300 light-years away on the Zephyri command vessel Eternal Dominion." High Commander Vorthak meditated in his private chamber. The walls around him were alive, grown rather than built, and they pulsed with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. Bioluminescent patterns flowed across their surface like thoughts made visible. Vorthak was ancient by any standard. He had lived for 800 years, had commanded fleets that brought low civilizations spanning multiple star systems. His mind fire was among the strongest ever recorded, capable of reshaping matter on a planetary scale. He was, by every measure that mattered, a god. So why did he feel so tired? The attack on the human settlement had been necessary. The species showed disturbing signs of resistance, and resistance was a cancer that had to be excised before it could spread. Yet something about their defiance troubled him. Most species, when faced with the full power of the Zephyri, simply collapsed. Their leaders committed suicide. Their populations fled to the outer rim. Their civilizations crumbled like sand castles before the tide. Humans did none of these things. When he had crushed their orbital defenses, they had cheered. When he had twisted their city into a monument to his power, they had rebuilt. When he had demanded surrender, they had responded with what their primitive communication systems called an anatomically impossible suggestion. They were either utterly insane or they knew something he did not. A soft chime indicated someone approaching his chamber. Vorthak did not need to turn to know who it was. He could sense the familiar mental signature of his lieutenant Nexai. "Sit forth," Vorthak commanded. "My lord." Nexai's voice carried an undercurrent of uncertainty that would have been unthinkable in any other species. "The humans have responded to our ultimatum, and they have declared war." Vorthak's eyes opened slowly, revealing pupils that burned like miniature stars. "War against us?" "Yes, my lord." Their message was rather crude in its specificity. They also transmitted something called a battle anthem. Our linguistic computers are still attempting to translate the phrase "come and take them." For the first time in 3 centuries, Vorthak felt something that might have been confusion. Do they not understand what we are? Do they not comprehend the scope of our power? "I believe they do, my lord. Our intelligence suggests they have studied recordings of our previous conquests. They know exactly what we are capable of." "Then they are insane." "Perhaps," Nexai agreed, "or perhaps there is something about this species that our databases have not recorded." Vorthak rose from his meditation platform, his movements fluid and predatory. Through the living walls of his chamber he could feel the mind fire of his crew, 43 Zephyri warriors, each capable of single-handedly destroying a continent. They were nervous. That in itself was troubling. Zephyri did not experience nervousness. "What of their planet's defenses?" he asked. "Primitive. Chemical rockets. Electromagnetic projectiles. Nuclear weapons. Nothing that could seriously threaten even our smallest vessels. Their space fleet, 17 vessels, all significantly inferior to our technology. They appear to be planning some form of coordinated assault." Vorthak's laugh was like the sound of crystal breaking. 17 ships against the Eternal Dominion? They might as well attack us with pointed sticks. "Yes, my lord." However, however, Nexe hesitated, a breach of protocol that sent ripples of unease through the ship's collective consciousness. Our psychological profiles of the species suggest they are unpredictable. They have a recorded history of defeating superior forces through tactics our strategic algorithms cannot account for, such as self-sacrifice, my lord, irrational persistence in the face of certain death, and something their military historians call spite. Vorthak considered this. In 3,000 years of conquest, he had never encountered a species that fought harder when outnumbered. Most civilizations grew more reasonable as their odds of survival decreased. Humans apparently did the opposite. Perhaps it was time to demonstrate exactly why the Zephyri ruled the galaxy. "Prepare the fleet for battle," he commanded. "We will meet their war with the full fury of the mind fire. Let them see what real power looks like." Outside the living walls of the Eternal Dominion, space began to ripple as 12 Zephyri warships prepared for combat. Each vessel was a work of art, grown from psychically manipulated matter shaped by will and desire into forms that defied conventional understanding of engineering. They moved through space not by burning fuel or manipulating gravity, but by simply deciding that space itself would bend to accommodate their passage. They were beautiful. They were terrible. They were absolutely unstoppable. Or so they had always believed. Back on Earth, in a hidden facility buried beneath the Rocky Mountains, Captain Kane stood before a holographic display showing the approaching Zephyri fleet. Around him the command center buzzed with activity as technicians prepared humanity's last desperate gambit. "Status report," Kane called out. "Fleet assets positioned and ready," reported Commander Lisa Park, her fingers dancing across holographic controls. "All 17 ships are armed with Mark 7 fusion warheads and the new quantum torpedoes Dr. Cross designed." "Will they work?" Dr. Cross looked up from her console, her expression grim. "Against Zephyracal materials? Probably not, but that's not the point." Kane nodded. He understood. The point wasn't to win through superior firepower. Humanity had learned long ago that such victories were hollow. The point was to make the Zephyri work for their conquest, to make them burn through their mind fire until their alien brains could no longer sustain the effort. "Sir," called Specialist James Wright from the communications station, "we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyri flagship. Put it through." The holographic display shifted, revealing the interior of an alien vessel that looked more like the inside of a living organism than a starship. At its center stood a figure that made Kane's breath catch in his throat. Vorthak was tall, nearly 8 feet, with skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His features were sharp, angular, almost crystalline in their perfection. But it was his eyes that truly marked him as inhuman. They burned with an inner fire that seemed to peer directly into Kane's soul. "I am High Commander Vorthapuk of the Zephyri Dominion," the alien said, his voice carrying harmonics that human vocal cords could never produce. "You have declared war upon us. This is amusing." Kane stepped forward, his voice steady despite the alien presence filling the room. "I am Captain David Kane, representing the United Earth Defense Force. We reject your demands for surrender." Vorthak's head tilted slightly, like a predator studying interesting prey. "And you believe your primitive weapons can harm us?" "I believe," Kane said carefully, "that you're about to find out what happens when you threaten a species that evolved on a planet where everything tries to kill you." For a moment, Vorthak said nothing. Then he smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too white, too perfect. "Show me," he said. The transmission ended. In the silence that followed, Kane could hear his own heartbeat, the whisper of recycled air, the distant hum of computers calculating impossible odds. Around him, his crew waited for orders that would either save humanity or doom it forever. "All ships," Kane said quietly. "This is Defiance Command. Commence Operation Deathwish." The name was fitting. What they were about to attempt defied every principle of military strategy, every lesson learned from 3,000 years of human warfare. They were 17 ships against 12. But the enemy ships were manned by beings who could manipulate matter with their thoughts. It should have been suicide. But as the first quantum torpedoes screamed through space toward the Zephyri fleet, Kane remembered something his grandfather had told him about the old wars. Sometimes, the old man had said, the point wasn't to win. Sometimes the point was just to make the other guy realize he'd picked a fight with the wrong species. Outside Earth's atmosphere, space erupted in fire and fury as two civilizations met in battle for the first time. And in that moment, Vorthak learned something that would change the galaxy forever. Humans didn't fight to win. They fought to fight. The first volley of quantum torpedoes struck the Zephyri shields like raindrops against glass. Each warhead carried enough destructive force to level a mountain range. But the mindfire of the Zephyri simply disagreed with their existence. Reality bent around the alien vessels, and the torpedoes ceased to be. Aboard the Defiance, alarms screamed as energy readings spiked beyond comprehension. Jesus Christ, whispered Specialist Wright, his face pale as he watched his instruments. The energy signature just hit 9,000 terawatts. That's impossible. Dr. Cross's fingers flew across her console, correlating data streams with the desperate precision of someone racing against time itself. Not impossible. Thermodynamically expensive. Look at the neural activity spikes. Vorthak just burned through enough brain chemistry to power a small city. Captain Kane watched the tactical display with the cold calculation of a man who had accepted his own death. How many more attacks can he counter? At that energy expenditure? Maybe 3. 4 if he's willing to risk permanent neurological damage. Kane smiled grimly. Then we'll hit him with 5. But before he could give the order, the Zephyri response came. And it was terrible. Vorthak raised one hand toward the human fleet, his eyes blazing with mind fire. Space itself began to twist, reality bending like heated metal. The Valiant, a heavy cruiser carrying 300 souls, simply folded in half, its hull crumpling like paper in the grip of an invisible fist. Valiant is gone, reported Commander Park, her voice steady despite the horror playing out on her screens. No survivors. Kane felt the familiar weight of command settle heavier on his shoulders. 300 people had just died on his orders. 300 families would never see their loved ones again. It was a price he would carry for the rest of his life, however long that might be. Sir, Wright called out, we're receiving a transmission from the surface. Multiple transmissions, actually. Route them through. The holographic display split into a dozen smaller windows, each showing a different face from Earth's surface. Admiral Rodriguez from the Cheyenne Mountain Bunker. General Harrison from the London Underground. Commander Okafor from the Australian Defence Complex. The leaders of humanity's last stand, and the expressions on their faces were not what Kane had expected. They were smiling. David, Admiral Rodriguez said, her voice carrying something that might have been joy. You beautiful, crazy bastard. You actually hurt one of them. Kane's confusion must have shown on his face because Dr. Cross looked up from her console with something like wonder in her eyes. Captain, I'm reading massive neural feedback from the Zephyri flagship. Vorthak's brainwave patterns are showing signs of severe psychological strain. Meaning he's in pain. For the first time in 800 years, something has caused a Zephyri to experience physical suffering. The implications hit Kane like a thunderbolt. The Zephyri were used to effortless conquest, to bending reality through will alone. They had never fought an opponent who could make them work for victory. They had never experienced the grinding, relentless pressure of a species that simply refused to die. All ships, Kane commanded, his voice carrying across every human vessel in the fleet. Continuous bombardment. Hit them with everything we've got. Make them burn. What followed was unlike any battle in recorded history. The human fleet swarmed around the Zephyri formation like angry wasps, firing everything they had: fusion warheads, quantum torpedoes, kinetic penetrators, even old-fashioned nuclear missiles dragged out of cold storage. Each attack was effortlessly countered by Zephyri mindfire, but each counter cost them something precious. Energy, focus, sanity. Aboard the Eternal Dominion, Vorthak staggered as another wave of human weapons tested his defenses. His head felt like it was splitting apart, neural pathways burning under the strain of constant psychic exertion. Around him, his crew watched with growing alarm as their invincible commander showed signs of weakness. My lord, Nexay ventured carefully. Perhaps we should withdraw to a safer distance. Regroup. No! Vorfak's voice cracked like thunder, and several nearby control surfaces crumpled under the pressure of his emotional outburst. We do not retreat from primitives. We do not show weakness to creatures that have barely learned to leave their own star system. But even as he spoke, Vorfak could feel something he had never experienced before: doubt. The humans were like nothing in the Zafari databases. They fought with a desperate fury that defied logic, pressing attacks even as their ships died around them. More disturbing still, they seemed to be learning. Each assault was more precisely timed than the last, forcing the Zafari to expend ever greater amounts of mindfire to counter them. It was as if they were deliberately trying to exhaust their enemies. "My lord," reported Kethvalar, the ship's tactical officer, "the human vessel designated Defiance is moving to attack Vector 77 Mark IV. Weapons charged." Vorfak turned his burning gaze toward the approaching ship, gathering his mindfire for another devastating counterattack. But as the power built within his consciousness, something unexpected happened. He hesitated. The headache was getting worse. The constant strain of battle was wearing at his mental defenses, creating cracks in his psychic armor that had never existed before. For just a moment, just the tiniest fraction of a second, Vorfak wondered if this was how it would end. 800 years of life, 3,000 years of Zafari dominance, all brought low by a species that didn't have the sense to surrender. It was in that moment of hesitation that Captain Kane struck. The Defiance didn't fire its weapons. Instead, it accelerated to ramming speed. Its fusion engines pushed beyond safe limits in a kamikaze run that defied every principle of space warfare. Kane stood on his bridge, watching the Zafari flagship grow larger in the viewport, and felt a savage satisfaction as he saw Vorthvik's eyes widen in shock. The aliens had never encountered a species willing to trade its life for a chance. Just a chance at victory. "All hands," Kane announced over the ship's communications. "It's been an honor serving with you." The Defiance struck the Eternal Dominion at 17% of light speed. The explosion was visible from Earth's surface. In the aftermath, as debris from both ships scattered across the void, something unprecedented happened in the remaining Zephyri fleet. They stopped fighting. It wasn't a tactical withdrawal or a strategic repositioning. They simply stopped. 11 Zephyri warships hung motionless in space, their crews staring at the expanding cloud of wreckage that had once been their flagship and their immortal commander. Aboard the Zarketh, Sub-Commander Yithal found herself in command of the fleet for the first time in her 400-year life. She was powerful. Her mindfire could shatter mountains, but she had never been tested the way Vorthak had. None of them had "Orders, my lady?" asked her tactical officer. Yethel stared at the tactical display, trying to process what she had just witnessed. A human ship, primitive by any measure, had simply flown directly into their most powerful vessel and destroyed it through sheer kinetic force. It was impossible. It was insane. It was terrifying. "My lady?" the officer repeated. Yethel found herself at a loss for words. In 3,000 years, no species had ever inflicted casualties on a Zephyri fleet. The very concept was unthinkable. Yet here she was, watching debris from Vorthik's ship drift past her viewport like metallic snow. Should we avenge the High Commander? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Should they? The remaining human ships were damaged, running low on ammunition, clearly no match for 11 Zephyri warships. It would be easy to destroy them all, to turn Earth into a cinder and erase this embarrassing defeat from history. But something in Yethal's mind rebelled against the idea. Vorthak had been stronger than any of them, and the humans had killed him. What if they could do it again? What if their apparent weakness was actually a strategy, designed to lure Zephyri ships into range of whatever weapon had destroyed the Eternal Dominion? "My lady," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." On screen, the display flickered to life, revealing the interior of a human ship. The bridge was damaged, sparks falling from overhead systems, and the woman standing at its center looked like she had been through hell. But her eyes burned with something Yethel recognized all too well. "I am Commander Lisa Park of the United Earth Defense Force," the human said. "I'm assuming command of the remaining fleet." Yethel leaned forward, studying this new opponent. Unlike Kane, who had radiated a kind of noble defiance, This one carried herself like a predator. There was something cold in her manner, something calculating that made the Zephyr's skin crawl. "You destroyed our flagship," Yathal said, her voice carrying harmonics of barely contained rage. "You killed High Commander Vorthok." Park nodded calmly. "Yes, and we'll kill the rest of you too if you don't withdraw from our system." The audacity of the statement left Yathal speechless. Here was a human, a member of a species that hadn't even mastered faster-than-light travel, threatening the Zephyri Empire. It should have been laughable. So why wasn't she laughing? "You have 7 ships left," Yathal pointed out. "We have 11. Your weapons cannot penetrate our defenses." "You're right," Park agreed. "But you can't maintain those defenses forever. Vorthak learned that the hard way. We are not Vorthak." Park's smile was sharp as a blade. "No. You're weaker." The insult hit like a physical blow, and Yathal felt her mind-fire flare in response. The hull of Park's ship began to groan under the pressure of telekinetic force, metal bending like clay in the grip of invisible hands. But instead of pleading for mercy, Park laughed. "There it is," she said, her voice filled with savage delight. "Burn yourself out, alien. Show me that famous Zephyri power." It was a trap. Yathal realized it too late. The human was goading her into expending energy, trying to recreate the battle of attrition that had killed Vorthak. She released her psychic grip, allowing Park's ship to stabilize. "Clever," Yathal admitted. "But not clever enough." "We'll see." Park leaned forward, her expression deadly serious. "You have 1 hour to withdraw from this system. After that we start hunting you." "Hunting us? With what?" "Your remaining ships are barely functional." "With rocks," Park said simply. "Rocks?" "Asteroids, comets, debris from your own flagship. Space is full of rocks, alien, and we've gotten very good at throwing them." Cork's smile widened. "You might want to ask the dinosaurs how that worked out." The transmission ended, leaving Yathal staring at a blank screen. Around her, the bridge crew exchanged uncertain glances. They were Zephyri, gods among mortals, masters of reality itself. They should not be feeling, what, fear, uncertainty. "Respect, my lady?" her tactical officer said quietly. "Long-range sensors are detecting movement in the asteroid belt. Multiple objects altering trajectory toward our position." Yathal closed her eyes, feeling the weight of command settle around her like a shroud. She was beginning to understand what had killed Vorthok. It wasn't human weapons or superior tactics. It was something far more dangerous. It was the terrible realization that they had picked a fight with a species that didn't know how to quit. "All ships," she commanded, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her mind. "Prepare for withdrawal." "My lady?" "You heard me. We're leaving." "But the Empire's orders—" "The Empire," Yathal said quietly, "has never fought humans before." As the Zephyri fleet began its withdrawal from Earth's system, Sub-Commander Yathal found herself thinking about the strange species they were leaving behind. In 3,000 years of conquest, the Zephyri had faced every conceivable form of resistance. They had crushed technological marvels, outmaneuvered military geniuses, and broken the will of entire civilizations. But they had never fought a species that viewed death as just another tactical option. They had never encountered a people who celebrated their own destruction if it meant taking their enemies with them. They had never faced humanity. 3 months after the Battle of Earth, the galaxy had grown quiet again. But this was a different silence. Not the oppression of absolute rule, but the breathless hush of anticipation. Word of the human victory had spread through the underground networks of a dozen worlds, carried in whispered conversations and encrypted data bursts that the Zephyri monitoring systems somehow couldn't quite track. On the Forge world of Kromek, where enslaved Valish had hammered out weapons for their conquerors for 800 years, workers began finding excuses to gather in groups. On the ocean world of Palladios, Nereid deep miners started painting strange symbols on their equipment, symbols that looked suspiciously like the Earth flag transmitted in human battle hymns. And in the crystal cities of Next Prime, even the Karathi began to whisper a word that had been forbidden for 3 millennia. Rebellion. High Overlord Zarthus stood in the central chamber of the Nexus throne, his ancient mind grappling with reports that defied 30 centuries of experience. Around him, the living walls of the throne room pulsed with patterns of distress, bioluminescent displays of confusion and concern that reflected the emotional state of the Zephyri leadership. "Explain this to me again," Zorthis commanded, his voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself tremble. At nearly 2,000 years old, he was among the most powerful Zephyri who had ever lived. His mind fire could reshape entire star systems, and he had personally overseen the conquest of 47 civilizations, none of which prepared him for this. Submander Yith Al stood before the throne, her head bowed in the traditional pose of supplication. But there was something different about her posture, a subtle tension that spoke of experiences that had changed her in fundamental ways. "The humans possess no significant psychic abilities," she reported. "Their technology is primitive by our standards. Their ships are inferior in every measurable way. By all logic, they should have been easily defeated. And yet High Commander Vorthak is dead." "Yes, my lord, killed by a primitive ramming attack." "Yes, my lord." Zorthis leaned forward on his throne, the living metal responding to his mood by sprouting thorn-like projections. "How is this possible?" Ithal raised her head, and Zorthis was disturbed to see something in her eyes that he had never witnessed in a Zephyri before. It took him a moment to identify it. "Uncertain. They fight differently," she said carefully. "Not to win, but to make victory as costly as possible for their enemies. They seem to view death as acceptable so long as it serves their strategic goals. All species fear death. These do not, my lord. Or rather, they fear it less than they fear slavery." Zorthis considered this. In 3,000 years of conquest, the Zephyri had encountered every form of resistance imaginable. Some species had fought with advanced technology, others with superior numbers, still others with cunning strategies or desperate courage. But all of them had possessed the basic survival instinct that made rational surrender possible. The humans appeared to lack this fundamental characteristic. "What of their homeworld? Have we received reports from the occupation forces?" Yithalal's expression grew even more troubled. "There are no occupation forces, my lord. Earth remains under human control." "What?" Zorthis's voice cracked like thunder, and several nearby courtiers flinched. "You withdrew from a single world? From primitives who had already taken casualties?" "My lord, with respect, we were outnumbered 7 billion to 43. They are primitives, without mind fire. What could they possibly do against Zephyri warriors? They could die trying to kill us," Yuthal said quietly. "All of them. Every single one. And they would consider it a victory if they managed to take even one of us with them." The throne room fell silent, except for the pulse of bioluminescent patterns across the walls. Virzis stared at his subordinate, trying to process the implications of what she was telling him. A species that viewed mutual annihilation as an acceptable outcome, a civilization that would choose death over submission. It was madness. It was also, he was beginning to realize, incredibly dangerous. "My lord," came a voice from the chamber's communication array, "we are receiving multiple priority transmissions from across the Empire. The governors are requesting immediate guidance." "What now?" The human victory appears to have inspired unrest among several subject species. The Valish have destroyed 3 processing plants on Chromic. The Nereid are refusing to report for deep mining duties. And the Karathi, "My lord, the Karathi have declared independence." Zorthis felt something cold settle in his chest. The Korfi had been among the first species conquered by the Zephyri, nearly 3,000 years ago. They were a crystalline people, slow to anger and slower to action. If they were rebelling, how many other worlds have declared independence? 17 and counting, my lord. All of them are citing the human example as justification for their actions. And our response? Governor Harathak requests permission to demonstrate the consequences of rebellion. He suggests making an example of the Karathi homeworld. Zorthis nodded slowly. It was the obvious response. Show the galaxy that the human victory had been a fluke, that Zephyri power remained absolute, crush the Korfi rebellion with overwhelming force, and the other species would remember their place. But as he prepared to give the order, another thought occurred to him. What if the other species had learned more from the humans than just the possibility of resistance? What if they had learned human tactics? My lord, the communication officer prompted. How many Korathi are there on their homeworld? Approximately 4 billion, my lord. And how many Zephyri in Governor Hyvertek's fleet? 62, my lord. More than enough to— No, Zorthus said suddenly. Belay that order. The throne room erupted in shocked whispers. A Zephyri overlord had just refused to crush a rebellion. It was unprecedented. My lord? Yithe looked as confused as the rest of the court. With respect, if we allow the Korathi rebellion to succeed, then 17 worlds becomes 70. Then 70 becomes 700. Zarthis stood from his throne, his towering form casting shadows across the chamber. Tell me, Subcommander, in your professional opinion, could 62 Zephyri defeat 4 billion Korathi if the crystalline ones fought like humans? Yathol was quiet for a long moment. No, my lord. Not if they were willing to die to ensure our defeat. Then we have a problem. The problem was worse than Zarthis had initially realized. Over the following weeks, reports flooded in from across the empire. The rebellion was spreading like wildfire, and every species that threw off Safala rule cited the same inspiration: humanity's impossible victory at Earth. More disturbing still, they were learning. The Valish had discovered that Zephyri mindfire was less effective against rapidly moving targets, so they had developed hit-and-run tactics that forced their oppressors to expend enormous amounts of energy tracking them. The Nereid had learned that Zephyri's psychic abilities were disrupted by certain electromagnetic frequencies, so they had begun broadcasting interference patterns from hidden transmitters throughout their cities. And the Korathi had discovered something that sent chills through every Zephyri commander in the galaxy. They had learned how to make Zephyri feel guilt. Commander Lisa Park stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt Defiance II, watching Earth's orbital shipyards work around the clock to construct humanity's first true starfleet. The sight should have filled her with satisfaction. Humanity had not only survived first contact with the galactic empire, they had inspired a rebellion that was tearing that empire apart from within. But Park felt no satisfaction. Only a cold certainty that this was just the beginning. Ma'am, came a voice from behind her. She turned to see Lieutenant Sarah Kim, one of the new officers who had joined the fleet after the Battle of Earth. We're receiving a transmission from the Korathi homeworld. They're requesting assistance. Park nodded. It was the 5th such request this week. Across the galaxy, newly independent worlds were looking to humanity for guidance, hoping that the species who had first broken Zephyri power might teach them how to keep it broken. What kind of assistance? Military advisors. They want to learn human tactics. Park almost smiled at that. Human tactics. As if there was some great strategic secret behind what they had done. As if their victory had been the result of careful planning rather than sheer bloody-minded stubbornness. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps what the galaxy was learning wasn't tactics at all, but something far more fundamental. Tell them we'll send a diplomatic mission, Perk decided. But make it clear that we're not offering military alliance. We're offering something else. Ma'am? We're offering to teach them what we learned on Earth. That sometimes the only way to defeat a superior enemy is to make victory too expensive for them to afford. As Lieutenant Kim relayed the message, Perk turned back to the viewport. Somewhere out there, the Zephyri Empire was struggling to maintain control over a galaxy that had suddenly remembered what freedom looked like. Zarthis would be weighing his options, trying to decide whether the cost of maintaining his empire was worth the price of continued rebellion. Park hoped he would choose to fight, because if there was one thing humans understood better than anyone else in the galaxy, it was how to make their enemies regret picking a fight. The irony wasn't lost on her. For 3,000 years, the Zephyri had ruled through fear, demonstrating their power so overwhelmingly that resistance seemed impossible. But in doing so, they had made a crucial mistake. They had become accustomed to easy victories. They had forgotten that some species, some individual members of those species, would rather die than submit. And once that lesson spread throughout the galaxy, once every oppressed world realized that their oppressors could be made to bleed, the Empire was doomed. 6 months after the Battle of Earth, Hive Overlord Zarthus made a decision that would reshape the galaxy forever. Standing in the central chamber of the Nexus throne, surrounded by the greatest Zafari minds of his age, he spoke words that no one had expected to hear. We withdraw. The throne room fell silent. Even the living walls seemed to pause in their pulsing, as if the building itself was struggling to process what it had just heard. My lord? Subcommander Yathal looked as if she had been struck. Did you say withdraw? From the contested worlds. From any system where the local population has declared independence, we pull back to the core worlds and consolidate our position. But my lord, protested Katvarax, one of the Empire's most senior military advisors, if we show weakness now, we are not showing weakness. Zarthus interrupted. We are demonstrating wisdom. The humans have taught the galaxy something that we failed to learn in 3,000 years of conquest. What? That power is not measured by how much force you can bring to bear. It is measured by how much force you are willing to bear. The implications settled over the assembled Zephyri like a shroud. For 3 millennia they had ruled through the demonstration of overwhelming might. Their mind fire had been so devastating, so absolute, that resistance had seemed pointless. But the humans had shown that resistance was never pointless if you were willing to pay any price to maintain it. And once that lesson had spread, the humans didn't defeat us through superior technology or better tactics, Zarthus continued. They defeated us by being willing to endure more pain than we were willing to inflict. Every species we have conquered possessed the potential for that same resistance. They simply needed someone to show them that it was possible. So we abandoned the Empire? Yathal's voice carried a note of something that might have been grief. 3,000 years of conquest, undone by primitives who barely know how to leave their own star system. Not undone, Zarthus corrected. Evolved. The age of empire through force is ending. If the Zafari are to survive in this new galaxy, we must learn to rule through something other than fear. Through what? For the first time in centuries, Zarthus smiled. It was not a pleasant expression, but it was honest. Through offering something worth more than freedom. As the Zephyri fleet began its withdrawal from the outer systems, a new chapter in galactic history began to unfold. On Earth, humanity watched the retreat with a mixture of satisfaction and weariness. They had won their independence, but they knew better than to assume the war was over. Commander Park stood in the rebuilt command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, studying tactical displays that showed Zephyri forces pulling back to defensive positions around their core worlds. The withdrawal was orderly, professional, the retreat of an army that was still dangerous, still capable of devastating counterattack if provoked. They're not beaten, she said to Dr. Cross, who was analyzing Zephyri fleet movements with the same intensity she had once applied to their energy signatures. They're regrouped. Agreed. But regrouping for what? The old model of conquest is clearly finished. Half the galaxy is in open rebellion, and the other half is watching to see what happens next. Park nodded, but her expression remained troubled. Zarthus is too smart to simply accept defeat. He's planning something. Such as? I don't know, but whatever it is, it's going to be more dangerous than simple conquest. Because now they know what we're capable of. Now they know that brute force isn't enough. Outside the command center, Earth continued its transformation. The planet that had once been on the verge of subjugation was now the unofficial capital of a growing alliance of free worlds. Ships from dozens of species docked at human stations, their crews eager to learn the tactics and philosophy that had broken the Zephyri Empire. But in the quiet moments between diplomatic meetings and strategic conferences, Lisa Park found herself thinking about the cost of their victory. Captain Kane was dead, along with 300 other souls aboard the Valiant and dozens more from other ships in the fleet. They had paid a price in blood that would never be forgotten. The question was, had it been worth it? As if summoned by her thoughts, Lieutenant Kim approached with another message from the outer systems. Ma'am, we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyri core worlds. It's addressed to you personally. Park straightened. From Zarthus? No, ma'am. From someone calling himself Nathavar. He claims to be a Zephyri diplomat. A diplomat. In 3,000 years of conquest, the Zephyri had never needed diplomats. The fact that they were deploying one now suggested that something fundamental had changed in their approach to galactic politics. Put him through. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a Zephyri unlike any Park had seen before. Where Vorthik had radiated predatory power and Yuthel had carried herself like a warrior, this one seemed different, calmer, more thoughtful. "I am Nethvar of the Zephyri Diplomatic Corps," he said, his voice lacking the usual harmonics of barely contained aggression. "I come with a message from High Overlord Zarthis." "We're listening." "The Overlord wishes to extend an invitation to the leadership of Earth. He would like to meet with you to discuss the future of galactic civilization." Park felt her wariness spike. "And why would we want to do that?" "Because the alternative is eventual war between our species, and because despite recent events, the Zephyri Empire remains the most powerful single force in the galaxy." Nethvar leaned forward slightly, his burning eyes fixed on Park's. "We could destroy Earth, Commander. Even now, even after your victory, we have the power to turn your world into ash. Then why don't you?" For a moment Nethvar was silent. When he spoke again, his voice carried something Park had never heard from a Zephyri before: uncertainty. "Because we are no longer certain that destruction would be victory. Your species has taught us that some victories are more costly than defeat." The transmission ended, leaving Park staring at the empty holographic display. Around her, the command center continued its work, analysts studying fleet movements, diplomats coordinating with rebel worlds, engineers designing new weapons for a war that might already be over. But in that moment, Lisa Park understood something that would define the rest of her life. The galaxy was changing, and humanity had been the catalyst for that change. They had shown every oppressed species in the galaxy that resistance was possible, that freedom was worth dying for. The question now was whether they had the wisdom to help build something better in the ashes of empire. 3 days later, Park found herself aboard a heavily armed diplomatic vessel, traveling toward the Zephyri core worlds for a meeting that would either secure peace for the galaxy or trigger a war that would make their previous battles look like skirmishes. As Earth dwindled behind them, she thought about Captain Kane and all the others who had died to make this moment possible. They had shown the galaxy what real power was. Not the ability to destroy, but the willingness to sacrifice everything for something greater than yourself. Whether that lesson would be enough to forge a lasting peace remained to be seen. But for the first time since the Zephyri had arrived in Earth's system, Commander Lisa Park allowed herself to hope. 1 year after the Battle of Earth, the galaxy looked very different. The Zephyri Empire, which had ruled for 3 millennia through fear and overwhelming force, had transformed itself into something unprecedented. A voluntary confederation of worlds united not by conquest, but by mutual benefit. It had taken months of negotiation, countless diplomatic crises, and more than a few near misses with renewed warfare, but the impossible had happened. Peace. Commander Lisa Park stood on the observation deck of Nexus Station, the former throne world of the Zephyri Empire, watching ships from 100 different species dock at what had once been the most feared location in the galaxy. Human vessels shared space with Zephyri warships, while Korathi crystal haulers offloaded cargo next to Nereid deep miners. It should have been chaos. Instead, it was beautiful. "Remarkable, isn't it?" came a voice from behind her. Park turned to see Nethvar approaching, his usual diplomatic robes replaced by something more casual. In the years since their first meeting, the Zephyri diplomat had become something she had never expected. A friend. Which part, the fact that we're all still alive or the fact that we're actually working together? Both, Nethvar admitted. A year ago, the very idea of voluntary cooperation with subject species would have been incomprehensible to my people. Now, he gestured toward the docking bays, where a mixed crew of humans and Zephyri were working together to unload relief supplies destined for the Outer Rim worlds. Now your people are loading medical supplies onto human ships to help worlds you used to rule by force, Park observed. That's gotta be strange. Strange? Yes. But also necessary. Nethvar moved to stand beside her at the viewport. We had grown complacent, Commander. 3,000 years of easy conquest had made us forget that true strength comes not from the ability to dominate others, but from the wisdom to know when not to use that ability. And what changed your minds? Was it really just the Battle of Earth? Nethvar was quiet for a long moment, his burning eyes reflecting the starlight streaming through the transparent aluminum. It was the moment we realized that your species would rather die than submit. In 3 millennia, We had never encountered a people who valued freedom more than survival. We're not unique in that, Park pointed out. Every species in the galaxy has that potential. You just never gave them a reason to use it. Precisely. And once they learned that resistance was possible, he spread his hands in a gesture of acceptance. Empire becomes impossible. You cannot rule a people who would rather die than be ruled. Perk nodded, understanding. It was the fundamental lesson of humanity's victory, not that they had superior weapons or tactics, but that they had been willing to pay any price for their freedom. And once that lesson had spread throughout the galaxy, the Zephyrae had faced a choice: evolve or die. They had chosen evolution. Commander, Nethar said carefully, there is something I have been meaning to ask you. Something personal. Go ahead. Do you ever regret it? The path your species chose? The cost of your victory? Park thought about Captain Kane, about the 300 souls lost aboard the Valiant, about all the human and alien lives that had been sacrificed in the year of conflict that followed the Battle of Earth. The price of freedom had been higher than anyone had imagined when they first declared war on an empire that had ruled for 3,000 years. But as she watched the mixed crews working together in the docking bays, as she saw species that had been enemies for millennia learning to trust each other, she knew her answer. No, she said simply. Freedom is worth any price. Nathavar nodded slowly. That, he said, is what makes your species so dangerous, and so necessary. As the two former enemies stood together watching the birth of a new galactic civilization, neither of them noticed the small human child in the diplomatic section below, pressing her face against a viewport as she watched Zephyrae and human engineers working side by side to repair a damaged Korathi transport. Her name was Hope Kane, daughter of a hero, citizen of Earth, and the first human child to grow up in a galaxy where freedom was not a dream but a reality. She would never know a universe where resistance seemed impossible, and that, perhaps, was humanity's greatest victory of all.